Hello everyone, Ember here, and welcome back to a new video. In this one, I'm going to be taking a look at some new Ancient Box decks from Japan. So, Ancient Box is based around the single prize attackers, Roaring Moon and Crydon, which debut in Temporal Forces. We'll look at the translations in more depth shortly. However, just a very quick deck overview, I guess. These lists are based around specifically Crydon and Roaring Moon. However, they will feature some other single prize ancient Pokemon, including the new Fluttermane that is coming out, as well as Great Tusk. So if you would rather see a Great Tusk video, for example, which is a mill deck basically, I've already done Great Tusk, but Great Tusk is still featured in many of these lists because it's just a fantastic alternate win condition sometimes. And you do tend to lean into counter catcher with this deck because, you will fall behind in prizes sometimes. So having that option to potentially gust up a Great Tusk at some point in the game, or like use Great Tusk and then gust with it, can give you that win condition of potentially milling out your opponent. So that's nice to bear in mind. Also, since these decks need a lot of ancient support, the deck is a bit more concise in how you might build it. It is a box deck, but you do have to play, 4 Brewster Capsule, 4 Sada, typically 4 Explorer. So it might not actually be that cheap if this ends up being playable because, you do need the set pieces and people will quickly realize that those cards are, worth something if people think they are in demand. So they might end up being a bit more on the expensive side, which I do think is unfortunate because it would be nice to call this a budget deck, but I think this is going to be more of a not like expensive deck by any means, but certainly a bit more expensive than people might think. However, a saving grace is that the Crydon is going to be a pre-release promo. And so when you pull that pre-release promo, and if you get Crydon, you'll get a pre-release promo version of that Crydon, as well as a regular copy of Crydon. So at that point, you just have to trade for someone else's Crydons and such, and then you'll be able to get a playset quite easily. So there is that at the very least. So, Also, some of this, I guess, is more bulk, like Explorer's Guidance probably won't see play in many other decks, and Awakening Drum is a super limited A-spec in that it can only be played in ancient decks anyway, so hopefully that ends up being a bit more on the cheap side. So what do these cards actually do? Well, Roaring Moon for 2 Dark Energy does 70 damage and then 10 more for each ancient card in your discard pile, which is a fantastic attack. It doesn't seem that good, but it is pretty good, especially in the late game. And we do have Dark Patch as well to help with energy acceleration. I know Sada is kind of like your best option really, but Dark Patch will definitely help get this thing rolling. You also have the Crydon, which is more of an early game hitter, but you could use this in the mid to late game when you have, a whole bunch of Pokemon set up. For Fighting Colossus, it does 30 damage for each of your ancient Pokemon in play, which isn't fantastic, but you can swing for 150, so it's not actually that bad at the end of the day. And both of these Pokemon are quite tanky in that they both have 140 HP, so fantastic. Doesn't mean that Booster Capsule will take these guys up to 200 HP. However, most of the time you'll probably just want to discard the capsule anyway, just so Vengeful Feathers is dealing more damage. Also worth mentioning is the translations for Great Tusk and Fluttermane very quickly. Fluttermane just says when it's in the active spot, your opponent's active Pokemon doesn't have an ability. And then Great Tusk says for 2 colors energy, this attack mills the top 2 cards of your opponent's deck. However, it mills a few more if you played an Ancient Supporter card. I think it's just mill 2 more effectively, so it's like a mill 4 effect. Also, I think you might mill 1 base actually, not mill 2 base. Sorry, I think, you mill 1, then you play an Ancient Supporter, you get to mill 3 more. So, quite a nice option. First up, though, is this very simple bare bones list. I would say this is the most simple as these lists get. So if you just want a nice template to get into playing this deck, then this is it, really. This is where you should start. And it's very simple. 4 of most things, and then 3 copies of Fluttermane, because it's not essential to the deck, but you do want to play more than 2 copies, just in case you prize one. And then 1 copy of the Great Tusk. So yeah. Very simple list. Not really masses to talk about, really. I would say Superior Energy Retrieval is probably the most interesting card because I think it's not really in here just to retrieve energy. It's mainly for that discard 2 cards from your hand effect, which is interesting. At that point, maybe I would rather play something like a Morty's Conviction, and just have an extra draw supporter, but Or like a Serena, actually. A Serena might be a nice choice here, but just to give you a gust effect that isn't counter capture, because I think sometimes you would want to use boss, but either way. I guess you have to play a Sada most turns just to kind of stay in the game. You do have Explorer's Guidance though, to like thin through cards and see more stuff, I guess. But yeah, I don't know about Superior Energy Retrieval. I think I'd rather have something else. It's a bit more reliable. Also, Trekking Shoes is quite nice, but at the same time, most of the time, like Trekking Shoes is just effectively another draw one effect, which again, I'm not super huge on that kind of thing. I'd rather just have more stuff that's, a bit more consistent, like more boss or more draw power, but still pretty simple list, very easy to play, and, very consistent. Very nice. Next up is a slightly more spicy variation on what we've just seen. This one is actually playing Boss's Orders. It's also playing a crowd pleaser of mine, Palpad. Definitely like to see Palpad in lists. However, what this deck is also playing is the Cobalion from Silver Tempest, which basically just says your basic Pokemon do 30 more damage to your opponent's active dark types. So which dark type is going to be really good post-rotation, I wonder? Maybe it's Charizard EX. So yeah, that's what that's here for. Is the plus 30 worth it? I think so, to be honest. Like, plus 30 just means that Koraidon's actually swinging a bit harder. But obviously, Vengeful Feathers is just dealing a lot more damage. I'm not actually sure what this deck caps at damage-wise, but I think it's moderately unrealistic to say that you're going to get every single Ancient card in the discard pile. It's worth mentioning, though, that I don't actually know where this deck caps, but still. I do like the Cobalion, but if Charizard ends up getting hard countered anyway by a lot of other decks, then it might not be worth the deck space for a Cobalion. And you might as well, just play like an extra Defiance Band or maybe even a fourth booster capsule, which already seems quite sketch, actually. I think you would rather just play the fourth capsule over a vacuum, but interesting choices nevertheless, and a nice single prize variant. Next up, though, is we're getting a wee bit more spicier. We're actually still playing Boss's Orders in this one, but we're going back to that Superior Energy Retrieval. Also playing, most notably, I think, the Roaring Moon EX, which is going to give you a very nice 1-hit option, which is something this deck sort of lacks, I think, in the early mid-game. You have the Koraidon to KO some evolving basics, you have Vengeful Feathers in the late game. You don't really have a big 1-hit KO move on EX Pokemon, so having Roaring Moon to basically just say, oops, just want to kill your Charizard, then that's nice to have that as an option. Also, this deck is playing the Slitherwing, so this player must really hate Iron Hands Miraidon, or maybe that's a really popular deck in their league. To be fair, I don't think Miraidon is going to be much of a threat post-rotation. It doesn't seem like a super great deck overall. However, players might yet make it work. It doesn't seem to be doing numbers in Japan, but it could, be good in the West, and there could be buffs in future sets. So even if you don't think Slitherwing is worth it, I would still pick one up while they are cheap, I guess, because, if Iron Hands Miraidon ends up being really good in the future, or, Iron Hands ends up making its way into more Chien-Pao or even Charizard Lost Zone decks, then Slitherwing would certainly be worth it. So yeah, definitely worth bearing in mind. Also, the special energy in this one's a bit different, playing Gift Energy. So when something gets KO'd, you get to draw until you have 7 cards in your hand. Really nice option because you don't have any built-in draw supporter, and therefore you're not Iono-proof. So a bit scary on that front. You are kind of proof to Iono Path to the Peak because Path to the Peak thankfully rotates. So Radiant Greninja can never really be shut down, which is good. But still, having Gift Energy is definitely a nice option. And honestly, I prefer it to Jet Energy most of the time. So yeah, pretty cool options. Next up, though, is we've got more of a focus on Great Tusk, funny enough, as well as the Roaring Moon EX. So this one is kind of cheating a bit. I know this is kind of like supposed to be single price Ancient Box decks, but this is going to be a bit of Roaring Moon as kind of the main focus. We're not actually playing Koraidon in this deck either. So this is definitely more of like a Roaring Moon invasion, I guess. But yeah, it's still a nice option to see that, you could lead more into Roaring Moon. Or like even if you're a player who's been playing more of the Moon EX and you try out the single prize option, you're like, you know what, this deck is fun, but it's not for me. I'd rather play Moon EX as the main focus. Then you could either go back to this variant or maybe even this variant. But, still quite nice options. I guess without Koraidon, you don't have to play Fighting Energy, which is quite nice. That could definitely get a bit awkward with Moon EX. But yeah, I'm not sure how much I like Roaring Moon post-rotation, but again, I guess if you want to play this deck post-rotation, then here's a list for you. And some other options just to go over before we conclude this video. The Dunsparce, I think, could actually be quite a nice option. It is a stage 1, which is a bit annoying because it means your Bull search has to accommodate some evolution search rather, so like Aromatic Incense, for example. However, it does say once in your turn you may draw 3 cards, which is nice. It's not like Bibarel where you kind of have to thin the hand out all the time, which is, I guess, what you're trying to do anyway. But with Bibarel, you're kind of saying you have to discard certain cards that you might not want to discard, so like extra solder and such. Whereas with the Dunsparce, it's just a flat draw 3, which I think is quite nice. Then you get to shuffle it back into the deck to reuse at a later point. So yeah, that's quite nice. Then we have Emergency Board, which won't really help the retreat cost of your regular attackers, except for maybe Fluttermane. But what Emergency Board does do is open the door to stuff like Comfey. So if you want to use Comfey for flower picking, I know Lost Zone isn't strictly the best idea for this because you're sending cards to a Lost Zone and not the discard pile, but you could still use it if you wanted to have a bit more, draw power in the deck. Then we have Maximum Belt, just again, more damage output. And then Brute Bonnet for Toxic Powder. So if you want to just put this on the bench, put a capsule on it, or maybe just discard it even, it could be quite nice. Rampaging Hammer isn't the best attack in the world, but still, I think the poison could be worth it. And we do have the Dangerous Jungle Stadium as well, which I keep talking about. So yeah, it could be a nice option. But yeah, thanks for watching. And, let me know what you think down below. Do you think this deck will be pretty good post-rotation? And yeah, thank you for watching.